Good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the City of Opa-locka first budget hearing. It is Wednesday, September 14th, 2022. The time is now 5:12. The meeting is called to order. Roll call, Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Bass,
Here.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Here.
Vice Mayor Taylor,
Here.
Mayor Williams.
Here. Please stand for invocation by Commissioner Bass and Pledge of Allegiance follow.
Give us knowledge, revelation, and understanding. Bless our city in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All righty, welcome back, everyone, into the thralls of everything. We're gonna make note that our manager is running late, and I do believe Commissioner Davis is running late as well.
Yes, he's running
Okay,
a little bit
perfect.
late.
All right, so we will continue. Madam Attorney, can you please read agenda item 5.1 into record?
An ordinance of the City Commission of the City of Opa-locka, Florida, adopting a final millage rate pursuant to section 200.065, the Florida statutes for fiscal year 2022 through 2023, commencing October 1, 2022 through September 30, September 2023, setting forth public hearing dates, providing for adoption of representations, providing for repeal of all prior ordinances in conflict, providing for severability, providing for an effective date. This is sponsored by the city manager.
Okay, thank you. Madam Manager, can you please introduce the item?
Good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. This is to approve, this is for first reading.
I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Good afternoon, Madam Mayor and Commission. This item is to approve our final millage rate for fiscal year 22-23. And I'll ask our budget administrator, Mr. Robert Anathan, to come forward and give a presentation.
Give me 1 second. It's a public hearing item, real quick. This is a public hearing item for agenda 5.1. Public hearing is open. Public hearing is closed. Okay, Mr. Anathan?
Oops. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening, Commission. Bob Anathan, Budget Administrator. As was mentioned, this is the first of two hearings. Before I start, I'm required by statute to read the following. I read as follows. The taxing authority, as we know, is the City of Opa-locka. The rollback rate is 8.5939 mils. The recommended millage rate is 9.3500 mils.
Mr. Anderson.
Not loud enough.
He's gonna turn you up.
I can move closer. I'll start again just for the record. The taxing authority is the City of Opa-locka. The rollback rate is 8.5939 mils. The recommended millage rate is 9.3500 mils. The recommended millage rate is an 8.8% increase over the rollback rate. The additional funding will be used to address union contracts, which were very much out of date, and to improve the city's vehicle fleet of vehicles. Thank you. Okay. We good to go? There we go. Thank you. As was announced a moment ago, the first thing we're going to address tonight is the tentative millage rate. Oops, sorry. As I mentioned a moment ago, the millage rate is recommended millage rate is 9.3500 mils. And what that rate, as you know, this year's rate was 9.650 mils. So this is a 3.1% decrease in the millage rate, which is, I think you also know, for those properties that are homesteaded, they can only rise 3%. Net result of that math is that any property that is homesteaded will not see increase on the Opa-locka portion of their property tax bill next year. One thing that I would suggest I take one moment to expand upon is the concept of the rollback rate, just so that everybody's comfortable with what the meaning of that is. Conceptually, what it says is we take our property tax base as of a year ago and we freeze it. We don't have any additions, no additional building, so forth and so on. So when we look at that property tax base 12 months later, what we see is the taxable value of that property tax base has gone up, either through market forces or if it's changed ownership. So a year later, that property tax base, again, without any additions, is more valuable. What it says is you can use a lower millage rate to get the same amount of revenue that we got last year. So, and that in fact is what the rollback rate in this case. So hopefully that concept is clear. Basically, that's all I have to offer on the millage rate. So I stand ready to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions from the commission? No, no questions. Can I have a motion to discuss the item?
Move it.
Moved by Vice Mayor Taylor,
Second.
second by Commissioner Dominguez. Any discussion? Okay. Hearing none. Madam Clerk, roll call.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I had stepped out, but did we do public hearing?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Taylor,
Yes.
Commissioner Bass.
Yes.
Mayor Williams,
Yes,
motion passes 4-0 first reading.
thank you. Madam Attorney, you can read item 5.2 into record.
An ordinance of the City Commission of the City of Opa-locka, Florida, approving and adopting the city's general proprietary and special funds budget for the fiscal year 2022 through 2023, commencing October 1, 2022 through September 30, 2023, providing for the expenditure of funds established by the budget, authorizing the city manager to take certain actions, providing for appropriation of all budget expenditures, providing for fees consistent with adoption of representations, providing for conflict and repealer, providing for severability, providing for an effective date. This is sponsored by the city manager.
Thank you, Madam Manager, if you can introduce the item.
Yes, good afternoon, Mayor and Commission. This item is to adopt the city's general proprietary and special revenues fund budget for fiscal year 22-23, and this is for first reading.
Thank you. This is a public hearing item. Public hearing is open for item 5.2. Public hearing is closed. Can I have a motion to discuss agenda item 5.2.
Move it.
Moved by Commissioner Bass,
Second.
second by Vice Mayor Taylor.
At this time, I'll ask Mr. Anathan, the Budget Administrator, to give his presentation.
Thank you again, Bob Anathan, Budget Administrator. We went through the budget a fair amount of detail in July. What I propose to do tonight is to give a reminder, make a presentation at a high level, just to remind you the context in which the budget's been put together. Budget is a 200-page document which covers an awful lot of activities. I would like to use the first portion of this presentation just to present the overview, and then my intent is to open the floor to any question that might come up tonight or might have come up during one of the prior hearings. Need help. Next. Okay. Back one slide, please. Too far. Forward one slide. Thank you. Very good. Okay, you do have handouts to just follow along, take notes as we go along here. Basically, I'd like to start with a qualitative statement of the overall budget at this point. The primary bullets in there, as we'll see in the detail, is the revenue growth is excellent. Property tax revenue is excellent. A couple other things we'll address as well. Everything I see in the property tax space indicates that, in fact, that it has been capped under homestead either 10% or 3%, and I think the growth is going to continue. One of the unique things about this budget we're presenting is $25.5 million of capital expenditure. That's far in excess of anything that's been done in recent time. And it really is a reflection of the city on the move. Beautification is at the top of mind for everybody in the city right now. I'm going to take you through about 3 pages of it. We're recommending expenditure of over $2 million to really try to move this thing forward. One of the things that I alluded to previously in the opening comments was that we had some very old, probably decade-old union contracts. This has a budget that will allow for where the negotiations seem to be going at this time. It does cover it quite nicely. There is headcount growth. We're talking about a 10% headcount growth, and there's been a reorganization to allow better focus on the city's major issues. We'll address that briefly. As I've told you a couple of times, you got 3 primary operating funds. 2 of them are quite healthy, your general fund and your stormwater fund. We'll look at that in some detail. Water sewer fund continues to be a problem, although we think we've made some progress, and I'll share that with you as we get there. Next, let's see if I can do this. No, doesn't want to play. No, there we go. Oops. Does work. Thank you. Okay, what I'm addressing here is we have talked about CIP and ARPA. A reminder that there is $25 million of capital in the budget tonight. Anything that's approved in this budget in regard to capital cannot go forward until it's brought back to the commission individually for approval. So basically what you're looking at tonight will be a tentative capital plan. But again, it's not, even though it's in the final adopted budget, we'll have a workshop, and then each project that you decide upon will come back for approval. So $25 million in your budget is, if and when approved, is not a formal commitment, whereas other things such as the headcount and so forth are. One of the other big items in the budget, everybody's been waiting for a long time, is your enterprise resource planning system. It is underway, or all but underway, and that's a primary portion of next year's budget. We're going to have a public relations firm on board to really communicate to the world what the city is all about, and certainly to even further enhance our communications with our residents. You're going to have a vehicle fleet that is going to be markedly updated this time next year. You'll probably have up to 60 vehicles that are no older than 2 years. So it's a market improvement over where we've been in the past. One of the things that you're all aware of is the delinquency utility funds. There has been some programs initiated that are really trying to focus on the big delinquencies. And at this point, we've already brought in 400,000 and certainly plan to bring in a lot more. Some of the other highlights are that we're trying to make paper documentation a thing of the past, so that you're going to see a lot of money, not a lot of money, but a lot of effort expended on moving towards imaging. Another thing that's built into the budget is the need for good controls. As I'm sure you're all aware, one of the requirements we have to meet to get out from the state financial control is demonstrate that we have a very sound set of policy in place. They're implemented, and we're living up to them. The budget does call for the position of an internal auditor to make sure that that does occur. One of the things that you will see shortly, either tonight's agenda or 2 weeks from now, is the recommendation to hire a firm that will assist with all of our blighted properties to get them into either get them in shape or, if necessary, take them all the way to foreclosure. Shot Spotter, you're going to see either tonight or 2 weeks from, in fact, you will see it tonight. As I think you all know at this point, this is a program that will allow the identification if and when shots are fired in the city to provide almost instantaneous indication of where the location is. Got a Parks and Master Plan, Parks Recreation Master Plan that will set guidance as to what you want to do with the park recreation system over the next decade. It's going to be focused on affordable housing and public-private partnerships. That is not firmly fleshed out in the budget at this time, but it's coming and you'll see a lot more detail on it. The resources are there. It's just a question of the details. We're talking about a second bus route. I want to go out for that again. And as I think I failed to mention, the state did accept the budget at the latter part of August as presented, and that's what we're looking at tonight, which again is the budget that you sent up at the end of September, end of July. I'm going back to this chart just so I don't start to use terms that have lost their meaning to you. I just want to very briefly talk about what are the structure of the budget, the structure of the financial organization, and so forth. You have 3 operating funds in the upper left-hand corner of the slide. That is where essentially all of your employees are, with the exception of 3. This is where all of your, essentially all of your revenue generation is. And this is where all of the services are provided. Beneath that, I have shown 3 funds, which are the capital funds. These are the funds where you actually do the construction to move the city forward. Here we go. Ahead. Thank you. So in the lower left-hand corner, what you see are the 3 capital funds where all the construction's done. So we'll make reference to that tonight. In the upper right hand, we have 2 internal service funds. They are the 2 funds that are going to provide both your risk management services and your information technology services. They are paid for by the 3 operating funds off to your left. And down below, we have the remaining funds that aren't otherwise addressed. Debt service fund is where we pay the debt service on the FY11 and FY15 bonds. The People's Transportation Plan is where the bus operation is done, plus some road improvements. Town Center is a fund that's been set up to demonstrate whether the operation of the municipal complex building can be funded by rental funds alone. The remaining 2 are the 2 special police funds, one's that's funded through seizures and the other one's funded through court fees. The second one is funded through court fees is for police training. So when all of that's said and done, you're talking about $64.4 million of expenditure that's embodied in this budget at this point. Financial overview very quickly. I'm going to push this away. Can you still hear me? I'll take that as a yes. Points. Is there any way that we can get the bottom half of the bottom portion of the slide onto the screen? I'm going to assume the answer is no. I'll ask you to follow along in the handouts. The points that I'd like to make on this one is you can see on the bottom of the page that covers this material, page 7, You can see in FY 21, FY 22, that there are excesses that are building up, and then in FY 23, we're actually going ahead and spend it. So you can see that the growth of 5.3 in FY 22, growth of 6.8 in 23 allows us to spend 12.8 more than we have in revenue in year FY 23. Other points I'd like to make on this presentation is grants. You can see in the upper right-hand corner highlighted. There we go. Okay. This is a very large portion of the funding for this year, proportionally large. Again, that's driven by the grant writer that the city's hired. The other two things I bring to your attention right now is that the 4.8 million, you can see the growth in compensation. That's the result of employee growth of about 10%, plus bringing 2 union contracts up to current levels. The only other thing I'll bring to your attention on this one is $17.3 million of additional capital expenditures. Once again, it's the city on the move to actually start to make a difference. I'm going to highlight the 20.6 million here. On the prior page, I showed you that city was going to spend $64.4 million. For display purpose, we have to show the money that moves between one fund and another fund. It's not money that leaves the city, it's just moving to another fund. In this case, it's another $20 million. So if somebody asks, our budget is 84.9, but really because of the interfund transfers, it's really $64 million of leaving the city. If there are no questions, I'll move on to the next one. There we go. City staffing, as I said, is going to be about a 10% increase over what was in the budget for this year. Those are the positions that are being increased or in some cases decreased. If there are any questions on that, I stand ready to answer it. Otherwise, I'll move it on to the next page.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor.
Please.
I have a question on the previous page where it says loans, 3.8 million.
Yes, ma'am.
What is that for?
They are state revolving fund loans that have already been provided to the city. It's going to be used for your utility funds. I'll take that back. Half of them have already been provided. We are applying for an increase on that there's a project, it's the water distribution project, northern portion, and we're also applying for a loan there as well. So about 2.6 has already been provided to the city. We're looking for another 1.1, 1.2.
So is a water distribution program?
It's your water distribution system. And this is for improvements for it, either that. When I say water, it also includes your wastewater collection and transmission system. So definitely your sewer system.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Are there any questions in terms of where the staffing is being added or deleted? If not, I'll move on to the next one.
Mr. Anathan.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you want to, if we have recommendations, would you rather us wait to the end or just ask now?
Whatever your preference is. Certainly, you know, if it's top of mind at the moment, I'll make notes and we'll go from there.
Well, I'm just curious under city clerk. Excuse me. This is to add one, or this is already what we're looking for now. Is that correct?
It's my understanding that this is to, Madam Mayor, thank you,
Mhm.
to increase it by 1. To increase the staff in the clerk's office. And that was at the request of the mayor and city commission
Yeah.
for an additional staff person to assist the mayor and commission.
Okay, so I just want to be clear. So under the staff for mayor and commission, that would be 2 as opposed to 1. We're increasing it by 1.
That is
You'll-
correct.
Okay, so, but you'll still have your assistant city clerk position, all that'll still be there, correct?
Yes.
Okay,
And Mr. Anathan can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're spot on. That's quite correct. No, it was in response to the July workshop. There was a request
Yes,
for an
okay.
additional person. And that's what you're looking at
Yes,
there.
that's what, I just want to make sure it's
Yes, ma'am.
clear, because that's what we wanted to see.
Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
And please stop at any time that you have a question, just so it's, current in your mind. Okay. Again, very, very high level. We're going to see very strong revenue growth. Excuse me, there we go. Fund balance, which I've talked to you on occasion, that is the one thing that we really have to be sensitive to in terms of ensuring that we maintain the target levels. Target level for the general fund is about $3.5 million. As you'll see, we're well above it. And we've already talked very briefly about the staffing increases. There we go. Again, I apologize that the very bottom portion has been cut off, but I think I can address that anyhow. First thing I bring to your attention, again, this is a repeat of what we talked at the city level, but this is appropriate for general fund. You can see that based on what, again, FY21 is not audited, but based on what's in the financial system at this point, we should have had about a $5.2 million surplus. For FY22, at the moment, the forecast is 0.9, but I will point out that to get to the 0.9 is $1 million of contingency. And there's no charges against contingency. It's just there against future unknown expenses. So if we don't get hit by a hurricane in the next 17 days, probably the better part of that $1 million is going to fall down. And so the forecast, the savings should be even more than what's indicated there. What we're talking about for FY23, revenue up by 2.3 million, as you can see in the upper right-hand corner, and we'll get a little more detail on that. The primary expense factors, no surprises, compensations for reasons already addressed. And you can see down here, the transfer out, basically you're looking at two things: increased capital expenditures, which we've alluded to previously, and also to the IT ERP, Enterprise Resource Planning System. It gets paid for, as I said previously, through the three operating funds, of which is a major one. So that's why you have the increase there. It's not visible here, but peeking out at the bottom, at the moment, we are forecasting that even after we spend $4.4 million of fund balance, we'll still be in very good shape with having 6.3 remaining when our target is 3.5 million. So as I said at the outset, general fund appears to be in very good health at this point. Are there any questions on that? Otherwise, I'll move on.
Did it real quick,
Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Anthony.
Yes, ma'am.
We just need to go back to the slide on city staffing. So I think I'm a little, I guess I just want you to clear something up for me.
Yes, ma'am.
Is this, and the way I initially read it, it was position. Is this position or is this funding?
No, ma'am. These are staff. These are headcount, full-time equivalents.
So maybe you can explain to me, I'm not sure what 0.7 means in staff or what 2.8 means. Like how is, to me, that's funding and not position.
No, ma'am. It's parts of people.
Parts of people. And sevens, pardon me,
Yes, ma'am. I will get there.
Okay.
And the 0.7 that you landed on was community development. In the prior budget, 1/10 of 4 people were assigned to the CRA. So that's not true for the FY23 budget. So those 4/10 have now come back from the CRA into community development. In addition to that, you have the interim the acting CRA manager who is still working within community development 25% of his time. So that's, by the time you add the 0.4, the 0.25, that becomes 0.65 for our purpose, rounded up to 0.7. People get allocated sometimes to more than one unit, or one division, which is why you can get fractions in some cases. So it really was 7/10 of a person.
Okay.
It seems like it's a cross between position and funding at the same time. I think that's where it gets a little.
It's my fault for not making this page clear, but this really what it says is the city started at 160. Somewhere my pointer. this is what we had in the FY 22 budget. We have increased budgets, positions by 16.3. If you could see the bottom of it, you would see the head count is 176.3. And you're going to say, well, how did you get the 0.3? And that's that quarter, that's your CRA manager. That is 25% of his time is still assigned to the city. This budget does, what we're looking at tonight does not include the CRA. That's a whole separate operation.
I think maybe another, because I'm thinking because it says full-time, part-time, the way I initially saw it was when I asked the question about the clerk was one position or one person. So I was thinking, I don't know if you want to create another column, and God knows I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but creating another column where it's a little bit clearer in terms of this department is receiving 3 bodies, people, actual people, and not that cut the split the way you're splitting it up, which
I'll have to
it still
think how
sounds
to,
more funding to me, but I don't know, to me, that's how I initially looked at it. And then when I went back, all those 0.7s and 0.5s kind of threw me off.
but they do translate into funding, obviously, because
Of
each
course,
tenth
yeah,
of a
that's what I'm
person
saying,
is a tenth.
translates in funding,
Yeah.
so
Well,
I guess I
I
would like to see a translated in person and also in funding as well. So that's-
funding is easy. Person, let me look at that and see if I can do something for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, whoops, one page too far. We covered this, unless there are no questions. Again, the most important takeaway on this is after all the effort expended, we still have a fund balance of $6.3 million, well above the target. Was there any questions? I will move on. Property tax base, and note that the left-hand column is FY19. That's not a typo, and I'll explain why in a moment. You had excellent property tax growth this year. Just a reminder of categories. The real property speaks for itself. That's actually physical properties. What's called personal properties is actually the machinery and equipment that's installed in all your commercial buildings, or at least where it's a substantive amount. And that's more important in Opa-locka than most places because 75% of your tax base is non-residential, unlike many cities. So it says, first and foremost, it's a commercial tax base, and that's the type of activity that brings in a lot of equipment. What I didn't show on this chart is the growth percentage-wise. The real property grew by nearly 15%. Which is a statement of market conditions primarily. The next line, the personal property grew by 30%, which means there's an awful lot of equipment that's coming into some of these new buildings here. And then the other thing I would share with you, it's not really highlight, well, it is highlighted. You can see in FY19, this was our total property tax base before you took out the CRA portion. And the reason I'm going to look at that level rather than CRA portion is the CR takes off a certain amount of growth, so it understates the true growth in the city. Long story short, 4 years later, that's a $1.55 billion, and that's a 75% growth over 4 years. So it says the tax base is in excellent condition. No questions. I will go on to the next one. There we go. I just wanted to share with you where your revenue is coming from, and I've highlighted the 4 major categories. Not surprisingly, big item on there is your property tax. Permits is a reflection of all the development work that's going on in the city. It's going to come in probably even better than 1.6, but I've tried to be conservative. Fines and forfeitures. $2.8 million next year. One of the primary reasons for the growth is red light cameras. At the moment, you've got 8 cameras in place on 4 intersections. And as you know, the city is moving forward with installation of 5 more cameras. I'm sorry, 6 more cameras at 5 intersections. And I don't understand it, but they don't seem to learn. The numbers keep going up. You know, you would think people, the word would go out, but the revenue has just gotten progressively stronger over the last several months. So anyhow, that's primary source of revenue. And then the last one is a little bit oblique, but what is happening here, I mentioned at the outset, you've got a debt service fund. It's got debt service of approximately $1.2 million a year. It's got pledge revenue in excess of $4 million. Surplus comes back to the general fund, and you can see that there's a 3.3 million. So that's the primary drivers of the general fund revenue in the FY23 budget. There we go. Again, this is the offset to it in terms of expense. Big expense growth is primarily in your compensation for reasons discussed. And then you've got two other very strong growth. You can see a growth of $600,000 being transferred out to your internal service fund for information technology. That's a reflection of the work that's going to go on in FY23 for the ERP. And then the other one is, at the price of beating a dead horse, is another growth of 1.5 million into your capital funds, just as another indication of the growth in your capital expenditures next year. Same information, but reflected in terms of where it is by department or by division. You can see the growth. I've highlighted 4 primary categories. The top one that I've highlighted is your non-department, excluding your transfers out. And the growth there is twofold. One is additional contingency. The contingency at the moment for the general fund is $1,250,000, which is up over the forecast by a fair amount. And the second one is paying for those extra 6 cameras for the red light cameras. Finance, you can see additional expenditures. You should have a fully staffed division at this time, unlike the last several years. In fact, there are 2 additional positions there. One is for a grants administrator. That's not the person who places the grants. That's the person who administers to make sure all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. Second one is a purchasing manager has been put into this department at this time. Next line is police. You can see $2.2 million. That's a reflection of several things. That's a reflection of the anticipated contract. That's a reflection of shot spotters. That's a reflection of the increase in the number of new vehicles that are going to be assigned to the police department. And then down at PW Streets, what you can see is just again, as I said at the outset, a reflection. This is the division that makes so much of the illegal dumping be corrected, as well as just general city beautification. So you can see the expenditures right there. No questions, I'll move on. I showed you this before, but I'm going to put it up. I won't go through because I believe it speaks for itself. There are 3 slides that address the things that we're doing on to get beautification to where it should be, B, to really bring to a halt the things that are the illegal dumping that's occurring at this point. 1 or 2 things that were not on prior one. There's now an illegal dumping task force, which pulls together all of the key divisions that are involved in that: IT, code, public works, police department. They meet on a regular basis to determine how they're doing against it, what they're learning, where corrective actions should be taken. I think you have seen most of this before, so I'll just leave it there. If anybody has any questions, certainly ready to answer. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next slide. This you've also seen. There's nothing new from what we looked at in July. And the third slide. Again, trying to address every aspect of the city to bring it up to the standards it should be brought up to. If no questions, I'll move on. There we go. Or we really talk to this,
Give
this,
Mr.
yes,
Hannaford-
ma'am.
We're trying to read through the
Okay,
slides.
I'm
so-
sorry, too quick. Okay, I apologize. I will go back.
No, it's okay. We just reading through.
I can address any point, but I think they really speak for themselves.
No, they do. They're,
Okay.
yes, we just,
Yes, ma'am.
wanted to make
Understood.
sure we read through them, that's all. I hate to be the queen of go back.
That's why I'm here. If you got questions, I'm not answering. I'm not doing my job.
I hate to pivot. Page 14, the 4 highlighted sections that you mentioned, under general fund expense.
Yeah.
So these are for, I get, well, 2 departments. The 2 departments, finance and police, correct?
And also, well, actually, they're each divisions, but 3 of them have people in it. The one at the top is just has no people and it's just for various things such as red light camera fees and so forth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, within, I guess the way I'm trying to read through it, because some, yes, are people and some aren't. So for, let's say, the ones that were highlighted that are actually have people, finance and police, is this saying that there was an increase in an expense or in that those 2 departments were able to bring in funds for the city? Is that what this is
No,
saying?
ma'am, I'm sorry, I didn't present that at all well.
Okay.
What this page is, let me go back so everybody. We're back. Thank you. What this page is saying, it is comparing the proposed budget, which is in this column right here, to the forecast and says, okay, where's your growth? So what this says is, for example, finance is growth of $600,000. And what that says is because you did not have a fully staffed finance department in FY 22, and you will in FY 23, your compensation is up considerably, plus there are 2 new people. So what this column is trying to say is this is where your growth is over where we think we're going to end up this year.
Where we'll spend more.
Where we'll spend more next year as compared,
Yes.
when the dust settles in FY 22, it's we think the forecast numbers, my best estimate of what they are. And what we're doing is comparing that as a starting point to say, how's FY 23 going to look different? And again, we're talking expenditure, we're talking cost at this point, not people. People triggered it, but all numbers here are in millions of dollars.
So how do we go in fiscal year 21 to 0.7 and then in 23 0.6? Does that mean we actually spent more? And
No, ma'am, the 0.6 is just a comparison of what's being proposed, recommended for the FY 23 versus FY 22. We're talking finance still?
finance,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. It's not clear. What we're saying is in FY 21, finance spent $700,000 for all things, their consultancies, payrolls, and so forth. In FY 22, we think the 700,000 is going to go to 800,000. For FY 23, we think it's going to go to $1.4 million, which is $600,000 more than the 800,000 we think is going to be spent in FY 22. Does that help? I hope.
So in FY 22, it did go up a good 100,000, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
From 700,000 to 800,000.
Yes, and then the proposal is possibly 600,000 on top of,
On top of.
yes,
Proposed budget for finance for FY 23 is $1.4 million.
okay. And, but that can't all be people.
You have a very low number. 2 things. One, by the time the FY 22 forecast is done, you had a lot of consultancy, but you had a lot of open positions during the course of the year. So you can see the budget was 1.1. And in fact, it came in, we think it's going to come in at 800,000, possibly even a little bit less. So it's differences people, because you're going to continue to have consultants in FY 23.
So it's pretty much safe to say that we spent more money on the consultant and their consulting agency as opposed to the bodies that we're going to receive now in the department. You don't have to answer that. Thank you. I'll move on.
Yes, ma'am. Are there any other questions on this page? I apologize. It was not as clear as I thought it was.
Mr. Anderson.
Sir.
To the mayor. I only have one question, as it relates to the police budget. You said this is to include the increase, the proposed increases and the 2 grants? Shot spotter and the,
It's the offset, it's the expenditure of the shot spotter service.
okay,
Yeah. And I also, at the last moment, also said it reflects the fact that the entire police vehicle fleet will be upgraded by the end of FY 23.
okay.
So there's a
okay.
lot of lease, additional lease in that expenditure.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, by doing things to tenths of millions, it's not intuitively clear, but I try to stay away from flooding the entire page with at the dollar level. I thought I was making it simpler, and I think I took it in the other direction. I
Yeah, I think
apologize.
the dollar will be,
But the whole page just goes black with ink, and I understood. We've got a second budget hearing, and I understand.
thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Yeah, we can move on.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I think we had gotten to page 18, just barely started. Okay, the story of this is that this fund at the moment is really close to operating at break even. It does not have surplus to be able to fund CIP activity. Footnote at the bottom, which is really not a footnote. Previously, there was only a water sewer fund, and it include all normal service operations as well as all CIP. What we've done this year is break it into 2 funds, one which is strictly operations, which we're talking about right now. The second one is strictly capital, and the only link between the 2 is any surplus that can come out of operations to fund the CIP. So that's a little bit different. There are two things that have been problematic for this fund. One is the last rate increase was in 1st of October 2015. One of the primary costs in this fund is the water that we buy from the county and the wastewater they process for it. The wastewater charges, I think everybody knows they've got problems in the county in terms of wastewater processing. That portion of our bill has gone up 28 to 30% over the last time there was a rate increase. So one of the problems we have is no rate increase. The second problem is that for reasons that I think everybody's familiar with, it has incurred a fair amount of debt. And that's what's making the difference between this fund operating above break even and below break even. We've been working with the county. They've made some recommendations. We submitted a proposal. They've been very helpful, and we should see, we think, maybe a $300,000 or $400,000 improvement in debt service next year. That's the background on this page. If that's clear, I will move on down the road. We good? Yes, yes, sir. Thank you. Again, the purpose here, oops, wrong button, my bad. Sorry. It's not going in the right direction. It's supposed to be going backward. There we go. Thank you. Bring your attention to the bottom line. I said that it has been operating at a loss. You can see the smallish loss that we think, not small, but not as big as next year, is an $800,000 loss. And again, that's related first and foremost to the debt service. This year, the loss is much bigger. Primary reason for it is there's the $1 million settlement related to the utility billing issues sitting right there. And you can see that we had originally proposed and got approval to get a loan from the general fund to the water sewer fund. At the moment, we're not sure that's necessary. We'll take a look once the FY20 audit is done, and possibly this forecast will change. We'll have to exercise that loan. For FY23, we're close to break even, $1.7 million for debt service. As I said a moment ago, we think we have proposed to the county a different plan, which would take $300,000 or $400,000 out of it. Instead of being slightly negative, would be slightly above break even. The biggest expenditure for this fund is in operating expense. It's operating expense. And as I mentioned a moment ago, that's really threefold. One, it's the water we buy from the county. Two, it's the wastewater they process for us. And then because they do the billing, we also pay them a fee for that. So of your 5.9, 5 million of it is what we have to pay to the county each month or each year. So that's where the money goes. If no questions, I'll move on. Stormwater operating fund, as I'll show you on the next page, a market increase in the revenue received by this fund each year by putting it in the property tax bill. Very healthy. It's going to be able, as you'll see in a moment, be able to fund a fair amount of CIP. And you also see, and you probably see it further in budget amendments. State was here to look at how our stormwater management was doing. They've come back with a report, water requirements for us. It's called MS4, if that rings a bell. So you won't see that so much in this one, but you will see it. We're going to have to do probably a budget amendment to pick that up. Bring your attention here. The first thing I'd like to bring attention to is in the upper left-hand corner, the revenues that we received in FY21. Again, for FY21, the fees were on the water bill, which is a very ineffective, inefficient way of trying to tie properties into water accounts. For FY22, you can see by putting it on the property tax bill, $1 million increase over where it was. This is a very healthy fund. Went into FY22, we think, with a 2 million plus fund balance. Target for this fund, it's a small fund. The target only has to be $200,000. So that just gives you some idea of how healthy this fund is. You can see now that this fund has got this extra revenue plus the fund balance, it's able to drive a lot of CIP. Again, this is a fund that has been broken into two parts, an operating fund and a CIP fund. This is money that is surplus to the operating fund that's moving over to support capital investment. Even with that budget, it still takes us down to a fund balance of $700,000. Again, about 3 times what our target amount is. Long story short, this is a healthy fund. Safe neighborhoods. If you remember back to the start of the presentation, these were your capital investment program funds. It is funded first and foremost by primarily the general fund. We do have some grants that get us there. We're talking about $4.1 million in projects. You can see 2 years ago, there was nothing. So this year we think we're going to be 3 million, 4.1. Again, the city on the move. Here we go. I've highlighted in yellow the ones that are FY23. We have $300,000 in there for demolition. And in fact, you will get a budget agenda item either this, I think the next agenda, which is going to use all of that recommend using all of that for 2141-51 Alabama Avenue. Historic City Hall, you're going to, it's $600,000. That is grant money. $300,000 for sidewalks, a roadway portion of relocation pump station number 4, and then some park projects there. This is part 1. It's really, there's a lot going on. So there's the second page as well. These are additional things. As I said at the outset, it's not mandatory. What you approve tonight, you can change your mind on. There's some things here that you really are going to have to be spent on. For example, the $800,000 for the Sesame Street Bridge really has to be in, obviously. The two railroad crossings, we're in a great FDOT requires that we do that to improve those crossovers. Other things you can see there are $100,000 for improving the commission, or not improving, relocating the commission chambers back to the third floor of the municipal complex building. $600,000 for hardening the public works headquarters facility or fleet maintenance facility, whichever. You'll see 100,000 of that in the next, I think the next commission meeting for actually getting started on the roof. Helen Miller, there is a $250,000 state grant that we've gotten really dedicated to the seniors program. At the moment, the budget assumes that 150,000 of that is going to go for a new large senior bus, and the remainder, which in this case would be $100,000, would be for improving the Helen Miller Senior Center on the second floor. To the extent that the bus is a lesser amount, then this number will become larger. We have proposed redoing the 6 city gateways to get a common branding and bring them up to something that everybody can be proud of. We're talking about a FERDAP that's going to be actually approved, part of what we got from the grant writer, which will be executed in FY23, and fitness trails for Sale Park. So that is the type of projects that are currently included in the budget. Again, there's going to be a budget workshop, but that addresses both CIP in general and ARPA in particular. So a lot of these may change depending on what your preference is. There's not much ARPA money assigned. In fact, none at the moment to this fund. So that may influence where the changes occur. People's Transportation Plan, very quickly, as I mentioned at the outset, the purpose of this fund is to support your community bus program, which we are going back out for bids. The first solicitation of bids was not to our liking. We think we can do better. It's funded primarily from the county half-cent sales tax, and there's also a U.S. Department of Transportation grant involved. So we're talking about $650,000 a target number for 2 bus routes and another $300-some thousand for roadway work. Very straightforward fund. Water sewer CIP. This is the corollary to what we looked at before. This is the CIP portion as opposed to the operating fund. You can see the grants are. I have to think for a second. There is a $500,000 grant there. Commissioner Dominguez, this is your loans that we talked about before. You can see where it really belongs is in the water sewer fund. When we talked about it before, it was on the top page. And at the moment, we're talking about $2.25 million to transfer in from ARPA funding. And again, that is going to be reworked depending on the outcome of the workshop. Within that, you can see that there is no transfer in FY23 from the water sewer operating fund because it does not have the liquidity. So we're talking about $6.8 million of projects, and they look like the following. Again, I've highlighted the ones that are FY23 projects. You can see Kyra Lane for $2.6 million. At the moment, that's all loan money. Pump station 12 rehabilitation, $700,000. In regard to pump station 12 and 16, at the moment, these are not funded by grants. But I will add that in recent days, the city's grant writer has submitted a grant application for $2.2 million for these 2 pump stations and for a third. And to the extent that we get those grants, then the money that's been dedicated at the moment to these will then become available. Miami Gardens service line, the $1.8 million there. Again, that was the other $1.1 million of loans that we talked about before. And there's important project here that we have to do in response to Durham requirements. Any questions on this anticipated CIP program? Stormwater CIP fund. This is, as I said, a much healthier fund. You can see the funding, $7 million. This was obtained by our city's grant writing service. At the moment, we are talking about 4 million and change for ARPA, not necessarily. And again, going back to the conversation about 2 minutes ago, the rest of it's coming in from the stormwater operating fund. And we're talking about close to $13 million of projects. And you can see where the money's being spent. Again, here, the 3.6 million for what's being called Commerce North at the moment is not being funded by a third party or another grant service. It's being funded by ARPA, again, on a preliminary recommendation basis. The grant writer has submitted another grant application in regard to this for $3.2 million. If we get that, then the funding that's tied up here will become available for other purposes. Town center very quickly. The purpose of this fund to exist was to try and demonstrate whether the town center, municipal complex building could stand on its own, be funded by rental revenue. The reality is that the city is using so much of that building that there's only one full floor and possibly a portion of the second floor. So the answer is, as long as the city is the primary tenant in the building, this building will never be self-sufficient in terms of rental income. And the only purpose of this page is just to demonstrate that at the moment, we're talking about $391,000 having to come from the general fund just to address things that the rental income is not taking care of right now. Coming down to the home stretch, 2 more pages. This is risk management, just to demonstrate this. Again, this is one of the internal services funds. In fact, it's paid for by transfers in from your operating funds. Your primary expenditure, not surprisingly, is our insurance bills from FMIT, which is close to just shy of 2.8 of the total number. So everything else is just trivial in terms of our FMIT bill. That gets us down to the last page of the overview. This is the only other place that we have headcount. We have 3 headcount there, with the other 173 people being back in your operating funds. Again, this is paid for by your 3 operating funds. And of the operating funds, about $1 million of that is software, and probably $600,000-700,000 of that software relates to your ERP program. So we're now at a point where that is the overview. Hopefully that you see either trigger some questions tonight or what we covered in July or anywhere in between that you'd like to discuss. I do have detail that we can go all the way down to sub-account level if questions are of that nature. So I would ask that please, any questions you might have at this point.
Okay, the floor is open for questions.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner Bass.
I don't have any questions. I would just like to say to our budget director, thank you so much for the hard work that you put into this project. I couldn't do it if I were you. I don't want to be you. Thanks a million, and
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
continue to do the great work you've been doing for the city.
Thank
Thank you.
Some of us had left brains, some of us had right brains.
Mr. Anathan.
Yes, ma'am. I can go back. I know how to go back.
They say don't go back.
Yes, ma'am.
Page 24. You may have said it. I don't know. Quick question. Gateways, is that the entrance into the city,
Yeah, those are,
correct?
yeah, the 6, I think we're at 6 gateways.
Okay,
Each of one looks different at this point. It's some level of disrepair.
yes.
And we
okay.
want to spend
I just-
$250,000 to bring them up.
Got it. I just want to make sure, I wasn't sure if that was something different. And only other thing that I would like to see, I do see that we have a project going on at Helen Miller, project going on at Ingram. I would like to see some type of project here at Shabundy, specifically the basketball court. That would be great. I'm just,
Yeah,
you know, something,
If I can address that before I forget. The FERDAP, one of the other things that's gone in from our grant writer in the last couple of days is a FERDAP for Shabundy, and I believe that's for the basketball court. But again, you're going to have a budget workshop or a CIP workshop, and you can, at that point, anything that doesn't seem right now will be addressable. Anything that's capital is not a commitment. It's just a placeholder for the moment, because any project here will not be done until A, it's been identified, and then B comes back for approval.
yeah, I would like to see something,
Yes, ma'am.
Updated
If,
here. If we're going
if I can
to,
comment on that, we put
Yes.
in for FERDAP for that, just that last year for Shabundy. And then we could not demonstrate we owned the building. We had to get an opinion of title, which we now have, so that won't be repeated. But they would not accept the fact that we didn't have a deed to the property,
Understood.
so it's in the pipeline.
And the trail, I believe, I can't remember, I can't see where I saw it. It said park trails, it just said
Yeah.
park trail. Is it all the parks or is it
No,
just
ma'am.
specific?
The last year, each year they had something called Trails Grant Program. Last year, we made the list, but we fell below the funding line. And the aspiration here, it was for Ingram. And the aspiration is, since we didn't get it last year, and since it seemed like a very attractive project, we would self-fund it this year. That's what it is at the moment.
Okay, so you're saying we will be funding it, the
Without a
project,
grant,
if we don't have the grant.
we haven't even put in for a grant for
Got
this year.
it.
We put in for trails at Sagal Park.
So is it specific park or is it all the parks?
The
It doesn't say, it just says park
It
trails.
really is my fault. It really is for,
No, never.
it's for Ingram Park. That's the intent of it.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yeah, on page 19, you talked about the $1 million water settlement.
Yes, ma'am.
The transfer in, I'm assuming the dash for 22 and 23 is after, and I think I heard you say it, but I just want to be clear. The audit is complete, then we will know if that can come from
Yes, ma'am.
this budget.
It's actually in FY 22. You have authorized, the commission has authorized borrowing from it. At the moment, we're saying maybe we don't know it. When the FY 20 audit is done, we'll have a better sense of the health of the water sewer fund. And at that point, if it's too unhealthy, we may have to exercise that option. The interesting thing about that is that that payment is on hold for the moment because there's been some appeals and so forth. And if it actually goes into FY 23 and we do the loan, then instead of having to repay in FY 23, because the requirement is to repay in 2 years, it'll give us 23, 24 months to repay it. So in some way, it's kind of a blessing.
And then it does open up my question, and I don't know if that would be you. Where are we then when it comes to the audit? Are we close to completing it? That's not a Ms. Bob Anathan question, correct?
Not directly.
Okay.
It is answerable. If you want somebody else to come up for a moment, it is answerable. As they understand it. It's close. It's best I can tell you.
Close.
I think the
Oh.
finance director is in much better
Yes.
position to give you a more crisp answer than that.
She's behind
There, hello.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Commission. Your question was how close are we to
Mhm.
completing the fiscal year 2020 audit? And
Yes.
our internal audit team has proposed the 30th of September as a date to have that final draft reviewed by the external auditor. So the end of this month.
That's great. Thank you for your work
Yes, ma'am.
that you walking in and getting that done because it's been on hold for a while from our previous audit team. So we appreciate that part, that we have a hard date because it's been getting a lot of extensions and we don't want to keep getting that.
Well, I pray it stands to that date.
I pray so too.
Yes,
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
So thank you.
yes, ma'am, you're welcome.
Anyone else? Okay. And again, thank you so much, Mr. Anathan,
Been my pleasure.
for your hard work. Crunching the numbers. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Commissioner Dominguez,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Taylor,
Yes,
Commissioner Baz.
Yes.
Mayor Williams.
Yes.
Motion passes 4-0 first reading.
Have a motion to adjourn the first budget hearing.
motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn has been moved and seconded. We are adjourned.